from Reuters.com. Ohio House of Representatives overrides veto of bill banning gender-affirming care. So one of the big cultural issues, of course, is the issue around transgender youth, transgender ideology, gender ideology as it pertains to sports, and of course, one of the truths that you have listed is that there are two genders. So many of us were shocked to see that in Ohio, despite the fact that the House passed this bill saying no to child sex changes, the governor tried to veto that. I'm curious your position on this, if you'd like to elaborate and break it down.
Yeah, it happens to be my home state, actually. Born and raised and live in Ohio now as well. So I was disappointed but not shocked is how I would characterize it based on the governor that we now have in Ohio. I actually spoke to the lieutenant governor. I was sort of a what the heck call, who I actually have a good relationship with, and turned out that he is also against the position that the governor took. And so the governor of Ohio is he's like the equivalent of, it's like the Chris Sununu's, the Nikki Haley's, the Chris Christie's, you could say, of the world. DeWine, the governor of Ohio, just falls into that category. I mean, there's a brand of people who put a nice little R after their name, but aren't really thinking according to clear principles. They're easily captured. I think in this case, what my understanding was, and I haven't talked to the governor, but I've talked to a lot of people who are familiar with the situation, is that a lot of people are making good money off of some of this gender conversion stuff, and sold a myth that somehow this is going to cause suicides amongst kids, and you're going to have blood on your hands. And so what ended up happening was they just got him to veto it. And that was the answer.
I do want to get into your position, but I want to address what you just said about the myth of the suicide, and I'll use the numbers that are widely accepted. There's something referred to as desistance. So you're familiar with this concept?
Not really.
Desistance is not detransition. Detransition is if someone identifies as trans, undergoes what they like to call gender-affirming care, and then backtracks.
Detransitioning.
Desistance is when a child says that they're trans and experiences symptoms of gender dysphoria, but without any transition, eventually grows out of it. Typically, this happens around puberty. The accepted rates are between 65 and 95% of young children who experience gender dysphoria will grow out of it, and they call this desistance. That means if we give the most benefit of the doubt we could to the gender ideology argument, around 65% of children will desist.
Okay.
Their argument, however, is it's life-saving to transition these children, but suicide rates could be as high as 48%. This means that you are increasing the likelihood of suicide by transitioning a child. If there is a 2 to 1 chance the child will desist, do not transition them and then give them a 50% chance of suicide.
Well, yes, it is a fact that suicide rates go up after they transition. I cover this extensively on my podcast. I've had detransitioners on my podcast, people that have gone through the procedure, got the bottom surgery, as they call it, and then woke up one day and realized their entire lives were a lie. And to hear those stories, I mean, it's incredible. It's a true evil, and it is being backed by Big Pharma. There is a lot of money, obviously, with these procedures, the drugs, the puberty blockers that they're putting them on, Lupron, and it's a part of a larger problem, something that I'm obviously very passionate about in terms of people not being educated and being sold lies and then going through a very radical route via Big Pharma to earn money.
I don't know how far you want to go with this, because I see a link to transhumanism. I see a link to eugenics. I see the rise of autism also linked to a lot of this as well. There's a lot of different components that we should really talk about. And I think more importantly, especially when it comes to the kind of chemical, biological war against human beings, when you look at male hormones and women's hormones, they're being dysregulated. They are being directly attacked. Fertility is being directly attacked by a lot of forces outside of us. How can we address a larger, what I see clearly, a depopulation agenda that has clearly been put in play and being used against us right now?
To wrap it all together, I suppose, as president, what could you do to address these issues around gender ideology and even a decline in fertility?
Oh, so those are, I think there's a couple different issues. I mean, gender ideology, a lot of this is being foisted through the Department of Education, right? So the Department of Education actually uses the federal money as a noose to get local schools to adopt ideologies that the Department of Education decides are the acceptable ones. Keep in mind, the origin of the Department of Education, people sometimes forget, was to prevent southern schools in southern states from siphoning money away from predominantly black school districts to white ones, but it's come somehow that institution has taken on its purpose to foist these radical gender and in some cases racial ideologies also onto local schools. So as it relates to the schools and the ideology piece of it, a lot of this is the head of the snake, the Department of Education. A lot of it violates existing civil rights laws and otherwise. So enforcing the laws on the books combined with actually shutting down the Department of Education is a pretty good start. Now, as it relates to what I see as an appropriate place for a federal, you could talk about how Reagan did it you could talk about technically using, how do we set the drinking age at 21? It was a 1984 law that effectively says you don't get highway funds unless you adopt this particular set of laws that set the drinking age at 21. But forgetting about the legal mechanics and just as a matter of policy, what we want in this country, if you're not 18 years old, you should not be getting any chemical castration or genital mutilation, just as you can't get a tattoo, just as you can't have an addictive drink of alcohol. And so my view is we do live in a free country. If you're an adult, a fully grown adult, you're free to dress how you want. You're free how to identify how you want, as long as you're not harming anybody else. Don't expect us to change the way we compete in women's sports. Don't expect to change the way we label our bathrooms, to change our language. But if you want to live your life the way you want, as long as you're not hurting somebody else with a presumptive expectation that the rest of society bends to your delusion, you're free to do so. But kids aren't the same as adults. And so I think protecting children is a policy position we've already well accepted in this country. And so the same logic and the same mechanism we use to prevent you from drinking by the age of 21, that we prevent you from getting a tattoo by the age of 18, you should not be undergoing genital mutilation or chemical castration as a minor in this country. And I think there's a pretty broad consensus around that.
And I want to add to this. I think it's interesting because when it comes to the issue of drinking, you can have a drink at the age of 21 and be fine. You can have a drink at the age of 31 and be fine. It's alcoholism that's bad. But if at the age of 21 you decide to undergo permanent and irreversible surgery and that was a mistake, you can't come back from that.
That's right.
So there is a serious challenge in how we deal with an issue like this, because I don't want people to take their lives. I think that's horrifying. But we did have a guest on this show who said that she thought she was a man. She believed the gender ideology she was being fed on the internet. And she talked to her brother. And he said, get your hormones checked first. You likely have a hormone imbalance. So instead of adopting the gender ideology and taking testosterone, when she went to the doctor and got her hormones checked, it turns out that she did have a hormone imbalance, so they prescribed her female hormones. She said almost instantly gender dysphoria disappeared, and she was in alignment with her own body.
Yeah.
And so my concern is, if someone like that were to undergo a surgery and then regret it later, I'm not going to pretend to know what a doctor should prescribe.
Can I also just say one word about this? I don't know this person or this individual, but there is a really small number of, so I say there are two genders, and it's a clear point. There is a small number of people in the general population who have chromosomal abnormalities. So we have, 23 pairs of chromosomes. Two of them are sex chromosomes. One is X and Y if you're a man, X and X if you're a woman. But there are some people who are born with XYY or XXY, and that's like a real thing. That's grounded in truth. It's not made up. It's in your genetics. One is called Klinefelter syndrome. One is called Jacob syndrome. These are exceedingly rare. We're talking about 1 in thousands at a much lower rate. So in those particular cases, yes, those are instances of what you will call intersex, which is a different phenomenon than trans. But what's happened is, let's take those rare cases to one side. And I don't know if this person you had here had such a thing or not. I would have said, not just go check your hormones, go actually get a genetic test and actually understand, are you one of the rare people with one of these chromosomal abnormalities? It's inborn. But for the purpose of this discussion, in our modern politics, I don't think that this pertains to public policy. Take that off the table. That exists, and we're going to acknowledge that. That's like a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the population. It's always existed. It's a chromosomal abnormality. For the rest of people, transgenderism, the belief that your gender does not match your biological sex, that if you're XX but you believe you're a man, it is a mental health disorder. Mm-hmm. And it needs to be treated as a mental health disorder through mental health care, which often isn't covered by private health insurance. A lot of this is through pharmaceutical intervention. They prefer pill-pushing behaviors as an alternative. Or people who run surgery centers prefer surgery, peddling surgery as an alternative. This is a mental health condition. And once we see it that way, we realize the compassionate thing to do is from a standpoint, because I think we've gotten put into this box of being somehow antipathic because of adopting this set of views that I think seems like most of us share. I don't think the compassionate thing to do for that kid is to affirm that kid's confusion. That's not compassion. That is cruelty. And I think we should actually feel that. It shouldn't be just a thing we say. We should acknowledge that and act with the compassion and say that kid's going through a struggle. Help the kid get through the struggle. That's what we should be doing. Not surgically operating on them and chemically castrating them.
You pointed out that it is a mental health disorder. It is listed in the DSM-5 as a mental health disorder. This is an academic statement. This is not meant to be invective.
Yeah.
But there are many people that I speak with who are liberal or Democrat that get offended when I point out the fact that it is listed in the DSM-5 as a mental health disorder. And my argument is there's another mental health disorder called pica. Are you familiar with this?
No.
It's where people eat things that aren't food. We don't affirm these things. We try to help these people, because I agree with you, as you said, to tell someone eating pennies is something they should do is cruelty to them.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.